Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh from Auckland in New Zealand.
I'm Zach Semke in Seattle, and
we've got Ilka and Mary James. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm Mary, and I'm in Northern California.
I'm Ilka, and I'm in Philadelphia, and it is sunny today.
It does look very sunny. Welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you as our returning guest. Always a special episode to have you on the show because it's fantastic, the people that you get out and interview, and we've got a great interview lined up today. So excited to get into that. But before we do, Zach, we've got a few people to thank for bringing us the Passive House podcast.
We do indeed. So everything we do at the Accelerator is thanks to support from our sponsors. So I want to give them a big thank you right now. Our founders are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Backstingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, Rockwool, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. And our champions are SIGA. Our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA. So thanks to all of these great organizations for their help and support.
And I like those fancy little logos on the fancy new website, Zach.
Hey, thank
pop
you.
Up on the site.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about the new website.
You should be.
It's been a good week for the website. President Biden's announcement of 50% reduction by 2030. Washington State just passed two major pieces of climate legislation on Sunday. We had a great policy summit last night. Things are good.
It's all happening. Yeah, so if you do want to check out any of those links to sponsors, do head on over to the Passive House Accelerator website, which is looking very fine now.
Well, thank you for your guidance.
Ilka and Mary, how are you both?
We're pretty good. We're well.
Doing well.
Who have you? It's busy time. Who have you got for us on the show this week?
So this week we are interviewing Katie Faulkner, and she's actually a friend of mine, and we're really, really excited to have her on the podcast. And she is currently a director of PT Tech, a division of Placetailor in Boston. And she is also the founder of WestFaulkner, which is an office with a mission for sustainable design that is beautiful, contextual, and environmentally responsible. And previously, she actually was a vice president of design for Katerra, focusing on mid-rise mass timber housing prototype. And for nearly a decade prior, she was a founding partner of the firm NADAAA. And she'll be talking about all of her experience over the last 25 years. And it's very exciting what she's done.
All right, well, let's get into that interview, and we'll be back afterwards. So here is Ilka and your interview with Katie.
Welcome, Katie.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So in 2010, you were awarded an MBA. And why did you choose to get that degree, to go through that program? And how did that relate to the founding of NADAAA in 2011?
Sure. I'm not sure the two were connected. At least I didn't think so at the time, although everything looks different in hindsight. The idea of getting that MBA, which I'd been doing part-time while I was working at Shepley Bulfinch, was because I had been very focused on project delivery. That was the time when you were starting to see P3 projects and different contracts about integrated project delivery. And I certainly had the ambition of going out and doing something on my own that looked at different ways of delivering a project that would control the amount of waste, whether that would be environmental, whether that would be cost. I just found that the process, particularly at the scale that I was working, which was the large healthcare, was just unimaginable, kind of the complexity of it. I found it frustrating. So that had been the motivator behind the MBA. It took me a couple of years to get it. And so by the time I got out, of course, I felt newly minted and ready to do something. Nader Tirani and I had been good friends in graduate school, and he was in the process of closing a firm that he had with another partner, and had asked me to do some consulting for him in 2010, along with another partner, Dan Gallagher. So the three of us would get together and mostly talk about contracts and building a book of business and how to make sure that the work that Office DA had done could in some way continue. Ultimately, that turned into conversations about an office, and we launched a new firm called NADAAA in January of 2011.
So, and while working there, you were actually involved in a very large CLT project, right?
Yeah. So that was later. So I was with NADAAA for about almost 10 years, for 9 years. And that project is what I would consider to be a kind of a typical NADAAA project. And that what's so great about NADAAA is NADAAA really focused on the process of design through delivery and took a look at the materials and the craft. And that was almost a concept or a schematic design departure. And so when we had the opportunity to do the work for Rhode Island School of Design, we weren't necessarily saying this is going to be a CLT building. We looked at their strategic goals. They are a very mission-driven college, and they are very focused on accessibility and inclusion, and not even just kind of in what we might think about in terms of either physical access or the kind of inclusion that we're talking about now, but on the absolute broadest possible scale. And that really pulled in and a sensibility about the environment. So in looking at the process and developing the program, we're immediately drawn to timber as both a highly durable and appropriate material for artists, because those rooms get a lot of abuse. These artist students really, they do their craft in their rooms. And if you looked at the R+D rooms over the years, you'd see that they're almost monastic in their durability. So timber certainly checked that box, but it also checked the box of a responsibility and a stewardship toward the environment that was very important to the school. Because it was an integrated project delivery contract and the first we'd ever done, we had the opportunity to test drive a ton of cost models and looked at all sorts of building types that might work for what we were after. Ultimately, I think we settled on a 5B, which is a hybrid with a steel frame and the CLT deck and roof. And that is on top of the concrete foundation. So that kind of 5/3 that you sometimes see, that kind of 3-hour first story, that's what we did. And it was groundbreaking at the time. I mean, there wasn't another building like it. We didn't have a precedent to look at least in New England. And I think that NADAA's process of work and prototyping, we do a lot of fabrication and lab work. That's what helped us get to that building. And I think we were all quite excited when it was finally realized.
And did that spark your interest in prefabricated panels?
It did, although I've been very interested in prefabricated panels for a very long time. I mean, as early as graduate school, I had this real fascination with the work of Jean Prouvé in particular, who wasn't actually an architect by training. I think he was more of a metalworker craftsman, but he was he worked in the realm of architecture, and he approached products in terms of how they would be built. He did a lot of furniture. He did a lot of demountable buildings. I think we could argue that these kind of ADUs and tiny houses that we now look at that are being pulled in on sites have their genesis in some of his early prototypes. And I always felt that that kind of design for manufacture would help us streamline the process. So even in other projects and even in other NADAAA projects, we were constantly looking for ways to pull in prefabrication, to create new assemblies and do them in a serial way so that we could use them on the site. Different kinds of wall panels that would be both high performance, but also go up very quickly. We did a project for MIT that had a really extraordinary wall panel. So I think the CLT was probably what pulled me toward my decision that we no longer could work with foam. I think kind of that project to me suddenly said, we can do all of these things with much more sustainable materials. We really don't need to focus on concrete. We really don't need to focus so much on foam. I think that the CLT pulled me into that realm of realizing that there was tremendous potential to do large buildings with a very sustainable material, notably timber.
So, and then in 2019, you actually started working at Katerra.
I did.
So, how did that happen?
So I found out about Katerra in 2015. I think there was this really splashy Wall Street Journal article that a lot of people saw where this one big company came out of the gate saying that they were going to fix construction as it had been broken. McKinsey had come out with a report maybe a few years right around then that had shown that the productivity in other industries in the last however many decades was just a big hockey stick in terms of what technology had done for most industries. And then kind of down there at the bottom in the flat line, you see construction. That had always resonated with me. It had resonated with me in business school. It had resonated with me as an architect. And now here comes this company with the kind of confidence to say, we're going to use Silicon Valley mentality of move fast and break things, and we're going to control the entire supply chain. And oh, by the way, we are building a CLT factory, and we're going to do it in timber. So not only is it going to be incredibly efficient, and will you be able to mitigate risk and certainly have a better sense of cost, but now also we're going to do this with timber. So how's so exciting? So I was actually lobbying them from the get-go. I found out that Craig Curtis, who I knew vaguely from my time working in Seattle, who I'm sure didn't remember me, but was a total nice guy about it, called him up and was like, hey, Craig. And what I wanted him to do was to hire NADAAA. That what they had been doing is they've been doing some partnerships with architects. They were working with Lears Weinzappel in Boston, who's done some really fine mass timber projects since then, but was probably first out of the gate. They were the first group I knew that was working in Boston in mass timber. I knew they were doing some work with them. They had a number of architectural associations, and I wanted them to work with us as well. I made a real pitch for the fact that we had an arm called NADAAA, that we were doing a lot of timber fabrication, timber prototypes, and both Craig and the CEO, Michael Marks, were nice enough to come visit when they were in the area. And so we were actually invited to join their design consortium, which was great. Kind of fast forward toward the end of the story, and they started actually acquiring some of these firms. They certainly didn't buy Lears Weinzappel, but they did acquire a couple of others, and they started acquiring construction companies. And so this idea of partnering with the architecture firms was less attractive to them. I was offered a position to work with them soon after, and I really struggled with that, but ultimately jumped at it. Again, this idea to have the resources to control the supply chain and take it on from this environmental perspective, to take this crisis that we all know that we're in and we don't really know how to fix it, and put a lot of money and incredibly smart people behind it, was just too tempting. And so I had the opportunity to work there, and I didn't even work there a year. I think I started in July of 2019, and by April of 2020, here we are in COVID, and I'm still commuting from Boston out to Seattle. And so I was furloughed, but ultimately my whole group disbanded. And so I never went back, and it was kind of crushing, even though it wasn't surprising. I mean, I think what'll happen with them is that we won't hear quite as much about them in the near term in terms of really big timber thinking. They will be quietly building projects, which they are doing all over the country, and kind of streamlining their delivery method. And then I think they will emerge as this kind of construction company that's really got a sense of the supply chain. And I hope that timber remains a part of that, because I think that investment that they made in mass timber is fantastic and has real potential. But stay tuned.
So what was the work that you did do then there during the time you were working there?
I was specifically working on growing the mass timber market. And by that, I mean either working with contractors and developers that had projects that might already have their feasibility studies and their entitlements complete under another construction type, and they were interested to see if it could be done in mass timber. So I did a lot of backing into that pro forma and looking at the designs and reconfiguring those. I also developed a housing mid-rise prototype. So this ubiquitous prototype that we have over the kind of 1 story of concrete deck or 3 stories of concrete deck with 5 stories of stick built, which is very common in, we see these kind of mega block housing projects, maybe more so in the West than we do here on the East, but we still see them, trying to compete with those and to show that we could build a better, more sustainable, more beautiful project by using mass timber. We reconfigured the modules, the structural bays. We designed it to match the manufacturing process. So taking into account the machines that were actually doing the glue lam or making the CLT billets and designing around those so that you'd minimize waste. It's incredibly difficult to compete on cost with stick built, and that certainly depends what part of the country you're in. But I still believe that it's feasible to compete on schedule, that once there are enough people in that market and once the delivery is streamlined enough, it's just so much faster to work in mass timber than it is in these more complex, or I'll say maybe more multi-material construction types. It's still, I don't think we're going to see those popping up anytime soon. I think volumetric modular is going to compete, I think, but it's just tough to beat stick built. And my goal was to try to do that. So I was constantly trying to kind of drive down the cost or drive down the schedule so that we could be on parity with peer projects that were being built under another construction type. It was fascinating work.
And did you become familiar with Passive House at any point during this process?
I did. You definitely can't not be in that mass timber world and not cross paths with the Passive House world. I think while they're not identical, there's a lot of synergy there. And so, and the other thing is that I've never been completely committed to the full-blown mass timber solution, that there's a lot of room for hybrid in my vernacular of mass timber. I think that probably does come out of the work with R+D. It's more important to get to net zero or close to Passive House, in my opinion, than it is to have complete fidelity to the mass timber construction type. So I think I started paying a lot of attention to the Passive House people. I had been familiar with Passive House, I think, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but Placetailor was a group in Boston that I knew. They launched about the same time as NADAAA. They were in the same neighborhood, so we kind of crossed paths with them. And they had come out right out of the gate in 2010, 2011 saying, we're only going to do Passive House. So here we are kind of working alongside them and watching them with their projects and I was thinking, why aren't we, meaning NADAAA, doing that work? Now, we weren't exactly in that typology. We weren't doing a lot of housing at that time, but it was really interesting to watch them. I really got an education kind of from afar, but then became much closer to it as we got into mass timber and started dealing with various kinds of certification.
So when you did leave Katerra, you started your own firm, WestFaulkner. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, that was kind of default, I think. I mean, I've always wanted to have my own thing, or at least thought I did, although I found right away how much I dislike working by myself. That was really, that suddenly I was so hungry for, any kind of collaboration. I started volunteering for like anything and everything that would get me on a committee. So I also found that I couldn't go back into an office, partially because of Katerra and having had the opportunity to work hand in glove with contractors and engineers, and fabricators. So I had really had this very interesting year of looking at project delivery from a very different perspective. And I think partially because the NADAAA experience was also very hard to replicate. We took fabrication and prototyping to be a big part of our process. And I can't think of another firm that does that to that extent. And I would go in and talk to people, or I guess at that time I was Zoom interviewing, and I just found I couldn't go back to the office. And it was hard to explain, but the only option left for me, I felt, was to go out and do my own thing and try to kind of collaborate or team up with people. So I was at least had the fun of colleagues, but the freedom to continue to explore some of these things that I really care about.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on the process at NADAAA that you were just describing? Can you give me an example of a project where you included the fabrication elements that you were just talking about?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I don't think I could think of a project where we didn't include the fabrication. Now, we didn't always fabricate our own construction, but we did sometimes. So, for example, with the North Hall project at R+D, we took when CLT arrives on site, it's often put up in layers, and in between the layers, there's kind of CLT offcuts that are used as almost like dunnage to stop the billets from hitting each other. So we picked up some of that scrap and we used it for some of the interior millwork, and we fabricated all of that ourselves. We did a number of stores. There's Aesop, which makes skincare, Australian-based company that has opened a bunch of stores in the US. And there was a period, I think we did 9 stores for them. And of those, I think 3 of them we built out ourselves. So that was the most extreme, where we would actually have a piece of a project or a project that we could actually build. So we had a pretty good shop. I mean, there were 5,000 square feet of studio upstairs and 5,000 square feet of shop space downstairs. And they still have that. I mean, NADAAA is still a very active part of the firm. When we weren't building our own installations, we were testing in the design phase. So we have this really interesting auditorium at the University of Toronto, which has a bunch of colored wood louvers that are kind of move. They appear as if they're moving. They're not, but it was through a play of CNC shaping the profiles to vary along the long length of the wall and interspersing it with contrasting colors that gives this amazing effect that we had gotten from these kinetic sculptors. Had been the inspiration. But I mean, just, weeks of testing these things and mocking them up and making sure that they looked appropriate. I mean, anytime we would do almost anything, particularly if it was a new detail for us, we would build it. And we had the good fortune of being it's an old plaster casting showroom and factory. And so the ceilings are incredibly high upstairs in the studio. So you can really build things tall. And then downstairs in the basement, while the ceilings aren't as high, it's a very durable and open space. And so you can build things long. So it's a material fabrication, testing, all of those things are just so fundamental to the process.
So do you feel like prefabrication kind of opens up an opportunity for women getting into the construction industry rather than kind of sticking with architecture?
I do. I think that as I have been practicing over, too long to 30 something or 25 plus years, I have noticed that schools have invested a lot of money in fabrication facilities, and people are starting to graduate with fantastic skills, everything from this kind of parametric modeling to using tools for digitization and computation analysis that produce beautiful objects. And for those first years when I would see this happen, I would kind of wonder what was going to become of this cohort of designers, because I didn't necessarily feel that the field was ready to receive them. Now, I think there are all of these companies that are popping up all over the country that are looking at ways to build things off-site, that are taking these tools that help us move from conceptual to manufacture, that allows it to be done at a scale that can be customized. And I think that's only going to continue. There is no muscular or gender kind of requirement on that. It doesn't necessarily come out of the trades. So you don't need to have the legitimacy of having kind of come up in the trades if you're going to be out there on the site actually building the thing. I think that the whole idea of the kind of modeling and the moving it from the software to realization is gender neutral. So there are definitely other barriers that we have to overcome in terms of attracting the women and getting them in. But I think that it's a tremendous opportunity for people. It opens up all kinds of issues. You can see people doing it, doing it from a variety of locales, because now it's all software based. And so it kind of can come together in one location, but you can pull your talent from lots of places. It can allow people that maybe had felt like they had to take time out of the workforce because they, how could you work construction if you had to raise a little kid? I think now that's a game changer. So I think it's huge. And I think it's got some retraining potential as well, but it does feel like a new frontier. I mean, I definitely learn something every day but short answer, yes, I do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And it's great that there's all these new opportunities. So you actually started looking at prefabricated retrofit panels, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So there's a wonderful competition that was launched in Massachusetts by Mass CEC last summer. And I was really excited about it. At this point, I've had my own office for just a couple of months, dying to dive into a competition. And I see something that's so up my alley in terms of giving the opportunity to pull in prefabrication and kind of alternate project delivery. So, and the premise of the competition looks at the tens of thousands of triple deckers in Massachusetts, which is this ubiquitous 3-story wood frame building type, most of which were built between 1900 and 1930. And it was primarily to house immigrants that were coming in various levels of industry. But if you've talked to anybody who's ever gone to school in Boston or lived here as a new family or a single person or came in, became a new American, oftentimes they'll say they lived in one of these at one point in their life. They're beloved, but they are leaky, they're cold, they're noisy. They're charming, but in that charming way of kind of, an old thing that needs to be fixed. I immediately thought of Placetailor as someone I'd love to partner with because it didn't require passive house per se, but it was the buildings needed to be electric, and they really, you really did have to evaluate them to passive house criteria. And so a lot of the kind of testing and metrics that had to do with the carbon calculator, it was just really important, I think, to pull passive house into the conversation. So thankfully and amazingly, Colin Booth of Placetailor said, yeah, we'd love to, which was great. So we spent several weeks working on this. We met every week. And my personal interest in it, beyond the passive house and the energy, which is the core of the competition, was trying to crack the business model for this, that in all of our looking in Energy Sprung and all these fantastic other programs that are out there, many of which are in Europe, we in the US are going to have a hard time doing this because it doesn't necessarily look attractive to a building owner, particularly a building owner of rental housing, that since they're not paying the energy bills anyway, and since they've got so many other expenses, the idea that we would come in and deep energy retrofit their building is not super attractive. We looked at a number of things. We did not think that you could get your money back on the net present value of the future energy savings, at least in a reasonable amount of time. You could certainly get your money back if you were allowed to add on to the building. So if you could get a fourth unit in, the real estate and the added rent helped. But if you could only spend the money that you could spend, the best bang for the buck was a very well-built wall panel. even more important than replacing the windows. That if you could replace the wall panels, if you could get this high insulating envelope on the outside, if you could come in with the cellulose on the inside, if you could do your best to seal the leaks, I mean, I'm speaking to the choir because I know you both already know this, that was where the money should be spent. When we began to design the panel and talk about manufacturing the panel and kind of dive down into it, we really struggled to find a non-foam based solution. We looked at hemp, we looked at mushrooms, but it had to be something that we felt like we could get. So in the end, our panel design did have some foam in it. It had the magnesium board, it had some foam in it, and it was what we went forward with. But we left that experience saying that we were going to try to launch what called a bio-based panel it was an integrated panel that had both the insulation and the siding as one unit, and that it had a high enough R value and was easy enough to install that it could compete with what's out there now. And that's what we've been focusing on. Placetailor is deep into this with me. Evan Smith of Placetailor is my partner in moving this forward. It's been really fun. The funding and is a kind of constant headache. I'm really anxious about trying to get it to the next level and trying to raise some money to do it. But I think it's important. And I think, as we've seen through these Passive House discussions and through the accelerator publication that you just pulled out, there's a tremendous amount of interest and talent that are biting at this apple. So I do feel like there's room for people. There's room for more than one entity to kind of come forward with these new products. But we'd really like to develop something that we could bring to market as a highly sustainable retrofit envelope.
And just to be clear, it would not be a structural panel, right?
It wouldn't. That isn't to say that it could not later become a component of a structural panel. But in the retrofit, I don't necessarily need a structural panel. I do have to support the panel itself, and there are issues of wind and in the installation, the panel, obviously if it gets too big, so I had this notion that they would be these big 10 by 20 foot panels, but frankly, the panel's own weight starts to compromise the integrity of the panel. But the building itself, at least in the typology of the triple decker, the building has enough integrity to support that panel. It does need something at the bottom to kind of keep it, in place, but the panel itself is an envelope. So it does have to have its own integrity, but it is not a structural element. We're looking for the building to support the panel. So it has to be very light. I mean, I'm looking at these kind of 4 to 8 pounds a square foot. I mean, you can't put a very heavy panel on these little buildings.
So how about windows? Are they installed?
Yes. So how about, right? It's so
Talk about weight.
No, it's not the weight. It is. No? I mean, I do think the weight is an issue, but in my vision, in my rendering, in our combined competition entry, of course, the panel includes the windows and goes in as an entire unit. We are struggling with that at the moment. It's not clear if it will go in as a unit or if the window needs to be installed after the panel is in place, or vice versa, that the window goes in and the panel goes over it. That I think the necessity to keep the panel really light might mean that it would go in a smaller increment than I had originally envisioned. And so there'll be plain panels and there'll be window panels, and some of those window panels might not actually be integrated solutions. So hopefully we'll talk in 6 months and I'll have the fantastic proof of concept and the windows right in there. But at this point, I don't actually know. It's ideal that it is. We're looking at integrating particular tilt-turn windows, but we have not had success yet.
And you alluded to the difficulty of finding the funding. How are you, what kind of funding are you looking for the development of the prototype panel?
We have written a grant for the Catalyst program, which is a Mass Ventures funded, Mass CEC program that does provide some funding for R&D for companies like ours. It's a little bit more geared toward university kind of based projects. In other words, something that has a PI, maybe with an affiliation that is looking to produce a product, but they still allow people like us to participate. So we have that pending, fingers crossed. I am looking at NADAAA to see if we can sort of go in there and see if there's any offerings. Ultimately, I think we would like to have some private investors that are aligned with the mission, that might be willing to ride out the extended period of time it might take to get this to profitability. But I don't think that we can appeal to them until we have panels on a building. You know, we're the advantage to working with Placetailor is that we do have somewhat of a pipeline there, and so in a small situation, we may have the potential to install the panels and really get them ready. They also all have to be tested. So we're trying to, if we were fortunate enough to get the Catalyst grant, frankly, I think we would use the bulk of that funding to take us through the testing that would need to be required on the panel, the wind, fire, moisture mitigation. You know, there's a kind of long list that we think are necessary.
But that is an advantage that you're working with a firm where you have, as you said, projects where you could actually use this. So they have retrofits in mind. And are they?
That's the hope. I mean, as I said, it all. I think everything has to fall into place. I mean, the thinking is that ultimately you don't want to saddle an owner with having to be a live guinea pig for the panel, and so we're pretty far from a situation where I think we feel like we could panelize a building where ultimately the units would all be sold as condos. So we have to kind of think that piece of it through. But at least we have the advantage of getting it up there, even if it isn't permanent. So, during some projects, that would give us some opportunities. Certainly, Mary, the goal is to get it on one of the buildings that's being developed, because then we've actually not only taken proof of concept, but we've implemented it. But I still think we have to clear the testing. And that's a real learning curve for me. That's all new for me. I'm not used to that world. I'll be calling Ilka, and I already do this when I have questions, what do you think about this? So, it is, it's a new terrain. It's a new frontier.
Yes, testing and third-party review is definitely something. So you actually introduced me a while back to a group that you're very active in, and it's called the Women's Development Collaboration. Could you talk a little bit about this group and maybe in general what role development has in the future of sustainable building?
Yeah, I think that I do feel that one of the ingredients to solving this problem that we face in looking at whether it's new housing, retrofit housing, kind of addressing what I consider the kind of morass of design through construction, has something to do with the delivery and the market of it. That, the more something goes through a phase, the more people that are involved, the more cost goes up, the more it's difficult to control. And so I think development is a really key part of solving the problem. And I don't think necessarily that the interests are aligned in development right now with, I think, what we're talking about in the passive house discussions, or even, more broadly in architecture, construction, engineering. And I think that has to change. I also have been generally active, I think, throughout my career in a lot of women's advocacy organizations, both as a mentor and a mentee. So when I saw the Women's Development Collaborative, and the reason I found them was that they were doing a seminar in Toronto where I had a building project with a complete women's own group. And I'd never even heard of that. Like I didn't know any women in development. And I had planned to go to that, and I'd signed up that pre-COVID, and of course that got canceled. So then I kind of found out about the group and wanted to get more involved. And it turned out that it's a pretty small group. Most of them are connected to ULI, but some of them are not. And their real mission is to bring more women into development and to support women developers, to help women better understand what investment in development means and how actually people can do that at a variety of scales. I've spoken before about Eve Picker, who has Small Change, who's really focused on crowdfunding and again, helping people who maybe didn't have the opportunity to invest in development. So I see a real alignment with the WDC, and I've done a few workshops with them on mass timber and this idea of the retrofits, just to talk about that kind of construction. But their mission is a lot broader. I mean, again, they hope to build a fund that helps women with development projects. So they're a really ambitious mission, which is wonderful. It's a great group.
Yeah, that's a great group. So do you think in general, by being involved in these advocacy groups, is that how you've included feminism in your working life?
It is. It's an interesting time to be, I'm in my 50s and I've been practicing for a long time. And of course, we're all at this inflection point when we're woken up to things maybe that we thought were fair and level and now find out that they're not. And this kind of question about being a woman in the field, I've changed the way I feel about it at many different times in my career. I think when I was younger, I was very willing to kind of look the other way and maybe play the game. I mean, I remember distinctly my first job in this training, and really a woman I admire, and I still admire her, but said to me at one point that it was really important to use my skirt as I was kind of trying to navigate the studio and the work environment, et cetera. And I've always remembered that. I remember this absolute moment, but at the time it was said, it was totally normal. Like, yeah, of course, so I've sort of learned to accept things that I thought, this is how it goes, right? You just laugh off certain things that are not appropriate, or maybe there are certain social situations that involve a lot of drinking that maybe you should avoid when it's with colleagues, and et cetera. And so as I've kind of change that, and then sort of standing back where I am now and seeing a younger generation of people kind of stand up and point these things out, I recognize how maybe I've actually been complicit in a system which has provided barriers for others. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. That isn't to say that I have not been a very active women in design person. There are loads. I'm fortunate enough to be in Boston that has a really active professional organization with the Boston Society of Architects, and the Women in Design group always provides wonderful resources for women that I've used many times in my career, both as someone who provides and teaches others, and as a younger person who's actually taken advantage of the tutelage. So, but that doesn't mean I'd say I'd be the most woke person ever. And so I'm finding this period that we're in right now, I'm particularly sensitive to the challenges to women, and particularly women of color or of other groups that are new Americans, et cetera. I'm just recognizing all kinds of things that I was willing to play at as we kind of come up through the profession really need to be changed. And fortunately, I think people are talking about that and we're looking at it. But I'm a very strong feminist architect and an evolving one.
In some ways, it parallels the attention that embodied carbon is getting.
I think they're related. I really do, because it's, whose world is this, is the sort of question we all ask.
And what world do we want to see in the near future?
Yep, you're absolutely right. I mean, if there's a silver lining to COVID, I would say that is this idea that we have all had time to pause and take a look at not only kind of how we got to where we are, but what is our near and longer term future. And I think that the environment has taken on a real social justice, mission's the wrong word, responsibility, that those of us who are in this field, it's more than just, doing kind of do no harm. It's more than just our own Hippocratic oath. It's actually this longer legacy that we're not only part of, but now actually have to write and kind of recorrect if we're at all have any hope of leaving anything behind. So I think they're absolutely married.
Yeah, and from my point of view, retrofits fit so well. I'm very excited about your work, because retrofits is a topic I've been covering for 25 years now. And suddenly everybody's trying to figure out how to make retrofits, deeper energy retrofits, be cost effective. and doable for more people. And it's really exciting.
It is really exciting. It's hugely inspiring. I think it's the reason why, and it's interesting because it's not just Passive House, but I am always surprised when I jump on one of your events to see 250 other people. And so I think that that is testimony to how important people feel that that the issue is, and that it's not just moving forward in kind of big new housing projects, but it's actually all of the other building fabric that has to have a carbon drawdown.
Yeah, what a good ending for our podcast today. Thank you so much, Katie, for talking to us, and good luck with your panel. Thanks. What you guys are doing, it's wonderful. I mean, it's just a great opportunity to participate in it. So I look forward to what's to come.
All right. Well, thank you, Ilka and Mary. That's another fantastic interview. Really inspiring stuff there from Katie Faulkner. What were some of the main points that you got out of that?
Well, I am super excited about her work on the retrofit panels, because retrofits been what I've been covering for almost as long as Katie's been working. And it's very exciting to see the progress that's being made and the attention that retrofits are getting. And I feel like Katie's experience is just crystallizing in the design of a retrofit panel. It's great that somebody like her got interested in a retrofit panel, because she has so much experience that could lead to successful innovations.
We sort of jumped into some of the solutions during this presentation, but for those that haven't thought about this very much, what are the challenges of retrofitting, and why is it such a big issue?
Well, mostly it's because every building is unique, and it takes a lot of time to figure out what are the solutions to make this building more sustainable, more comfortable, more energy efficient, and to last for the next 50 years. But there are solutions that you can implement that are more, I don't want to say repetitive, but can be used from building to building. And that's what's exciting. What's exciting about what's happening now in the world of retrofits is that people are trying to figure out how to industrialize retrofit solutions rather than approach them on a one-by-one basis.
So trying to come up with something versatile to be used in all different types, even though each building, like you say, is unique. There's no straight lines. All the dimensions are different, but coming up with a system that can work on multiple buildings.
Yeah, and what's unique about Katie's approach too is that she's really trying to do this whole panel as a foam-free option. So really kind of even lowering the embodied footprint of these panels. And that's not easy. The easier way is how it's been done in Europe, and now starting to be done here as well is, EPS foam on the outside of the buildings. But her approach is really just kind of trying to figure it out without that and go a more sustainable path.
So expanded polystyrene or even extruded polystyrene are very tempting materials because they're such good insulators and relatively cheap, right? But there's other issues with them. And people want to sort of move towards more natural products. That's what she's trying to do. Are they the main issues with foam?
Well, that they're made with fossil fuels, and people are trying to move off of fossil fuels and use more renewable products.
Yeah. Zach, what did you think of that? Any outtakes from you from Katie Faulkner?
Well, I mean, the bio panel is exciting, and her thinking about how to apply that, I think, to the triple decker building type. I mean, one of the things that she alluded to, energy sprung approach, and these efforts to really help spread retrofits on a kind of really wide scale, really scale up retrofits. And a key to Energiesprong, my understanding is that if you can solve one building type, then you can replicate that. Yes, there will be variations, but you have a solution that will work for that building type, and you can do it many, many, many times over. So it'll be fun to watch how that triple decker solution that she's been working on might be applied many, many times, and I know there are other teams that are working on that. I should say, just an aside, is if people are curious about learning more about the triple decker challenge that she referred to, that's being run by Mass CEC in Massachusetts, you can refer to the podcast with Beverly Craig a couple episodes back. Also the video from the Policy Summit, and we'll put a link to the webpage at Mass CEC in the show notes to learn more about that. But if that's the triple decker in the Boston area is something, you see thousands and thousands of them. So if we can solve with a low embodied carbon affordable approach for that building type, it could make a really big difference in the carbon footprint of Boston's buildings.
Yeah, it's really exciting stuff. I've been thinking about, similar to you, Mary, the problem of retrofitting is only going to get bigger, and because most of the buildings that are going to be around for the next 10, 20 years already exist. So we need to figure out how to fix those up. I was interested when she talked about having a high quality wall panel replacement in some buildings is even more important than figuring out the windows, because the walls are either solid material that is basically a big thermal bridge, or if it's a lightweight material, may not have any insulation or very little insulation, may be drafty. And it's relatively easy usually to stick some insulation in the roof or in the attic, in the cavity if there's a ceiling, maybe fix up the floor. But the walls can be a challenge, particularly if it's a older building and you've got to maintain some of the aesthetic of that building. It's a big challenge. The other thing that is great having you on the show, both of you, Ilka and Mary, you are continually finding some amazing women out there doing some amazing work in the field. Was there anything surprising? I mean, Katie was pretty frank about some of her experiences. Was there anything particularly surprising about what she said to you working as a woman in the industry?
Not sure if it was surprising, and I've actually been talking to Katie quite a bit about how just kind of prefabrication actually could have so much potential for kind of pulling more women into the construction world, because all of a sudden you become like a virtual framer or a virtual kind of construction worker, and there is really no reason why a woman couldn't do that. And and I think she made that clear that she sees a lot of potential there, even over the last so many years that she's been working in this field, and she has a lot of experience just kind of merging those the design and the construction over time. So I think that's just very exciting.
What about you, Mary? Anything stand out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I was at all surprised by her experiences in the field. I mean, how many women of our age have had experiences like that? Probably, close to 100%. So, which I have to say, as a man, I'm surprised by your lack of surprise, which is sort of a shocking thing. And I think it's a really important thing to realize that it's real. It's a real issue, and we're all partly responsible and need to be aware of that. On the positive side, I
get the sense that a lot of Katie's success up to this point, and will be her success going forward, is a willingness to collaborate and surround herself with people with other skills, and also to share what she's doing. It's great to see someone who's kind of in the trenches still. She's openly talking about that she doesn't have all the answers just yet. She hasn't figured out this magic panel yet, and it's really great to see someone in that space and be sharing some of the challenges, but also their willingness to collaborate. It's such an important theme of just the whole sector, but certainly we see that quite a lot. I think you see that a lot in Passive House world and part of the Passive House Accelerator, Zach.
Yeah, definitely. She talked about her Katerra experience, and which always, whenever I hear about an insider talking about Katerra, my ears prick up. This juggernaut of kind of a tech approach to remaking construction, and anyway, I think there are lots of interesting stories that are behind the scenes.
I have to claim my ignorance here and say I don't know what Katerra is.
It's a North American thing. It was, they got huge VC money, like $1 billion. They were getting $1 billion at a time to basically solve construction, I think that Ilka and Mary can probably speak more eloquently about what Katerra is about, but it became huge and sucked in tons and tons of talent from the community, and so peers would be being hired from architecture firms and things, and those people would last 9 to 15 months and then leave, or so it was like, what's going on with all this churn and huge money and huge promises, and it sounds like, her assessment, I think, is that there's going to be something, they're doing work, and there'll be something that emerges on the other side. But what I was trying to get at there is that there's this motivation that you hear her talking, or an excitement about the potential for innovating in this field, and seeing more of the hockey stick that she described for other industries that the McKinsey study talked about, instead of this flat line of no, or even a dip in innovation in construction. And you hear, just because it's not happening for her at Katerra or for many other people at Katerra, doesn't mean that this isn't a movement that's really important and exciting, and that it can't happen at Placetailor and at WestFaulkner. So it's clearly there's to me, that's a really exciting motivation to witness, and I'm eager to see what comes of it.
So there's room for everyone.
That's right.
To do good work. Ilka, Mary, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that the idea of things happening at several places, it's not just one big place that just kind of shows up and reforms everything, but it seems like it's actually rather happening on a smaller scale, and maybe it's not as fast as everyone anticipated at first, but it's kind of happening at so many places broadly, that through collaboration and through just kind of working with each other and maybe sharing things, just how Katie did, and is open about, okay, we're still figuring this out and we're still working on this. I think that's kind of a really good outlook, and just that the idea of collaboration, maybe not being stuck on one particular system, but maybe finding hybrid solutions is going to make a difference. And just kind of to see how long it also takes to even just develop one panel, just talking about the testing and talking about finding the right materials. And we've talked to these other podcast guests about, okay, what's missing and what do we want, especially in retrofits, and it's always kind of a little frustrating that it's taking so long. it should just be there. But talking to someone who's developing this, you kind of realize, it's hard.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, an exciting potential for builders across the country to be fabricating panels once a design becomes more evident. And so it doesn't, I like the idea that everybody could jump into it, because there are buildings everywhere that need to be retrofitted, and it doesn't have to be one mass factory putting out these retrofit panels. So it's a way to get more smaller companies involved and more local workforces. Yeah.
Great stuff. Hey, well, thank you for bringing us another great guest on the show. Always a pleasure to have your insights and bring along some really inspiring people doing some great work. So thank you, Ilka and Mary. Zach, what do we got going on this week in the coming weeks?
Yeah, so for Construction Tech Tuesday, which is Wednesday your time, Matthew, we'll be joined by Kyle Mocht of Mocht Architecture, and he'll be presenting about the Twofull Passive House project. And then for the Global Passive House Happy Hour on Wednesday our time, Thursday your time, we'll be hearing from Tim Ian, who will present the Lexington Parkway Passive House Plus project. We're also really excited. We're working with Passive Buildings Canada and Passive House Canada on a co-produced special event on May 20th called Resilience in Canada. So we'll share more details about that soon, but mark your calendars, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on Thursday, May 20th.
Great. Hey, well, thank you very much. Thanks again for bringing us a great guest. Thanks, everyone, to listening. And thanks also to those sponsors who help bring us not just this show, but all the rest of the Passive House Accelerator, which, as I mentioned, you can see them and loads and loads of great content on our fantastic new website. Thank you, Zach, for all the hard work that you've put into the Passive House Accelerator website. Still evolving.
Yes, it is. And thank you to Sydney Gladu for helping make it happen too. And Matt Rothenberg and lots of other people.
Yep. And also, as always, thank you to Sydney Fishman, who helps put this podcast together and bring it to your ears every week. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast.